Welcome, Vintage Hollywood Archive. He sobbed before his marriage to Priscilla, "I don't have a choice." The answer to what could have given Elvis Presley this impression isn't a single reason. As it turns out, many powerful forces were at play, and each was threatening to act on the mistakes Elvis and Priscilla themselves had made. Why Elvis Presley cried a night before his marriage to Priscilla. Make sure to watch this video until the end, and if you are new here, don't forget to join our wonderful community by subscribing to our channel. Elvis was forced to marry Priscilla. Elvis Presley's marriage to Priscilla Presley lasted barely 6 years, yet it was one of the most recognized celebrity marriages of the time. Elvis's only marriage was to Priscilla Presley, with whom he had one daughter, Lisa Marie Presley. The relationship between the two wasn't as smooth as it appeared on the surface, but Elvis fell in love with her when he was in his early 20s, and he was reportedly under pressure to marry a woman 10 years younger than him. While serving in the military in Germany, Elvis Presley met Priscilla Wagner. Priscilla's stepfather, an army officer, and his family were also stationed in Germany. The American singer was 24 years old when they met, and his crush was 14. Her parents were definitely against her dating the musician, who was already famous and far too old for her. But the young girl insisted because she was madly in love. They started seeing each other, but never alone. However, one day the king of rock and roll violated orders and took his sweetheart to Graceland without a family chaperone, which displeased the teenager's parents. Priscilla's parents gave him an ultimatum: either marry their daughter, or they would file a report for minor embezzlement. Elvis was successful in convincing Priscilla's parents to agree to the move. However, it was only the beginning of a long and complicated relationship. The star agreed to Priscilla's parents' terms. They got married in Las Vegas in 1967 after becoming engaged in 1966. Elvis felt pressured to marry her, but he was confident that he could teach her how to be a nice wife. Still, Elvis wasn't sure whether he wanted to marry her or not. Some witnesses believe he was upset at being forced to marry, while others report he was happy. Before his marriage to Priscilla, one of Elvis Presley's closest friends found him crying in desperation, leaving the question: why did he go through with it? According to some, he was under pressure from Priscilla's parents and Colonel Tom Parker, his manager. Parker didn't think it was a good impression for Elvis to have a minor living with him and then not marry her. Finally, Elvis agreed and went through with the marriage, despite the fact that the couple's relationship was already showing cracks. Elvis dated other women before and after they were married, and eventually, Priscilla decided she wasn't going to sit around and take it. The couple divorced in 1973. However, the question remains: how someone can force Elvis Presley to marry Priscilla if he really didn't want it, and why Parker was so concerned about their marriage. Also, what was Priscilla's side of the story? Why didn't their marriage last? Let's find out all these answers. It is certain that the relationship between Elvis and Priscilla Presley wasn't all the fairy tale that everyone thought. Much has been said about Elvis Presley's stormy relationship with Priscilla Presley. Priscilla has spoken openly about their time together before and after their marriage. Priscilla wasn't any more ready about the act of marriage than Elvis Presley himself, with everything from severe emotional concerns to legal reservations. So, what may have brought these two together? According to the book, Down at the End of Lonely Street: The Life and Death of Elvis Presley by Peter Harry Brown and Pat H. Broski, it was Alberta Elvis's housekeeper, cook, and dear family member that found Elvis crying over the upcoming wedding in 1967. Trying to comfort him, she asked him why he wouldn't simply call off the wedding if it was making him unhappy. To Alberta, Elvis simply replied, "I don't have a choice." Interviews with Priscilla Presley and the biography reveals the key factors that pushed Elvis into feeling he had no choice. At the time, persistent rumors reached Elvis that Priscilla's father was furious with him. He was threatening to prosecute Elvis for taking his daughter, a minor at the time of their early travels, across state lines. While no one can deny that Elvis and Priscilla Presley were head over heels in love, this simply added to the issues. Even when she was only 15 years old, Elvis couldn't resist taking Priscilla to LA and Las Vegas with his crew. Their travels together were in direct violation of Priscilla's father's agreement with Elvis. He had promised her parents that their young daughter would stay in Memphis with him. She had to be accompanied at all times by grandmother Minnie Mae and attend school. However, Priscilla and Elvis were inseparable. Instead, They chose to do whatever they wanted, with Priscilla even sending fake postcards to her family in Germany from Memphis. Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was another person who was also deeply concerned. Priscilla reported while speaking to Barbara Walters in 1985 that Presley's manager had put the pressure on Elvis to marry, and marry soon. "I think the pressure was on somewhat. We'd been together 6 years. The relationship was going well. The suggestion, I think, came from Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager. Either you should get married or go on. If you're not getting married, then what are you doing?" she told Walters at the time. But it sounds strange that if they had already been together for 7 years anyway, why would the king have to be forced to marry the woman he was living with? Was it really forced, or was there something that felt right to Elvis Presley, or at least partially right? Yes, it was Priscilla's age, because he thought he could control her. He had even molded her into the perfect image of his ideal partner. Unfortunately, that was the root of all their problems, as well as one of the main reasons he tied the knot despite his mixed emotions, and ultimately the end of their short-lived marriage. Biographer Alma Nash said, "Elvis was always looking for that young girl he could mold into the image of Gladys, who had died when he was in the army. In a way, he dressed young women to resemble her. He picked out their clothes. Priscilla was perfect. They first met in 1959, when Priscilla Beaulieu was 14 years old and the king was serving in the military in Germany. This was the star's pattern. Sandy Martindale, another girlfriend, was the same age when they started dating a few years after he returned to the United States. Nash said, "In the American South, at that time it wasn't unusual for a man of his age to date a girl of her age. However, that didn't mean it would work well for everyone." Well, coming back to the point that Colonel Parker pressurized Elvis, Nash added, "When Priscilla moved into Graceland, the colonel lost his mind. It hadn't been that long since Jerry Lee Lewis married his underage cousin, and people went crazy. The colonel insisted Priscilla was kept a secret, both for the morality issue and to maintain Elvis's image as a single teen idol. However, this encouraged Elvis to be constantly seen dating starlets and actresses throughout his Hollywood film career in the 1960s. He became known for pursuing the majority of his co-stars, particularly Ann-Margret from Viva Las Vegas. Meanwhile, Priscilla was left behind in Graceland. Elvis was torn between battling his desires to play the field and to settle down with a woman that would make his mama proud. Elvis made sure that Priscilla remained loyal to him until they married. The star liked to keep Priscilla on a pedestal while he played the field elsewhere. But this was the beginning to cause problems for his career. Nash said, "Elvis was getting older. It was time for him to settle down and get married." Another reason that the colonel was eager to get Elvis settled and married was that there was a morale clause in his contract with the studios, and of course, Elvis was being Elvis and violating that clause all the time. Surprisingly, it wasn't all the running around with endless new girlfriends that was the issue. It was that he had been living in unmarried sin with Priscilla for so many years. The reason why Colonel Parker was so concerned was understandable. He wanted to protect Elvis's image being his manager. Meanwhile, Priscilla's father was also growing increasingly angry at the delay of the wedding and the worry his daughter might be used, disgraced, and then cast aside. There were reports he even threatened to prosecute Elvis for taking a minor across state lines. On top of all this, Colonel Parker was not happy with Elvis's fierce relationship with Ann-Margret. She was the strong-willed, ambitious, and seemingly best match for him. Elvis had already begun asking his manager to take her on as a client. Parker saw her as a dangerous distraction and possibly a threat to his influence. Nash said, "Elvis was hot and heavy with Ann-Margret, and it looked like he might dump Priscilla to end up with her. The colonel was very worried about that, so the idea that Elvis would be a married man and settled appealed to everyone, just not to Elvis." Sandy Martindale, who Elvis was dating at the same time as Ann-Margret, said, "I know he loved Priscilla, but I don't think he was ready to get married." Years later, Priscilla also confessed that the pressure was on somewhat, and it was Colonel Parker's suggestion. In the end, Priscilla Beaulieu became Priscilla Presley. Shortly before Christmas 1966, Elvis proposed to Priscilla and they married on May 1, 1967, at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. The wedding ceremony, arranged by Parker, lasted only 8 minutes. It was followed by a quick press conference and a $10,000 breakfast reception, attended by friends, family, and business associates from Elvis's film and record companies, MGM, RCA, and the William Morris Agency. There was certainly very little romance to the wedding, which sounds to be more like a business agreement and publicity stunt. Priscilla was 21 at the time, and 9 months later to the date of their wedding, their daughter, Lisa Marie Presley, entered the world, giving Elvis at least one cherished reason to never regret their union. Yet, Priscilla sensed it was the beginning of the end. Priscilla was not pleased when she immediately fell pregnant, fearing it would disrupt the way Elvis saw her. And she was right. He stopped coming to her at all. He even briefly left her a few months later. Priscilla told Barbara Walters, "Elvis had a hard time dealing with me being a mother and the little girl that I was to him. I didn't know it then, but that's what I realized in later years, that he was a father to me." We can say that all the rumors that Elvis Presley was forced to marry Priscilla were not completely wrong, and now we even know that there was some pressure on Elvis. But don't you want to see the other side of the picture? After Elvis's death, Priscilla denied that her father pressured him to marry her. The King of Rock's widow broke her silence on the matter during a Q&A session at Graceland's celebration of Elvis's 85th birthday. According to Express UK, Presley spoke candidly about the issue, revealing she was finally setting the record straight. "It was never that my father wanted me to go to Graceland ever," Presley said. "I had begged my mother to talk to my dad. It was Elvis's suggestion that I come and see him in the summer of '62. It was his suggestion that I get my dad, talk to my mother, about me coming." She went on to add, "I never ever said, 'Can I come? Can you let me come?' I was never that girl. I was very reserved. He was the one who told me he wanted to see me, and my dad had to talk to him. I was going to stay with Elvis's father, Vernon Presley. It was not that easy, but the story's out there that I wanted to come to Graceland. It was never that way around." She later explained that it was Elvis making the phone calls. "I didn't know when he was going to call. It could be 3 months. It could be a couple of months. It could be maybe 4 months," she said. Again, he was also busy too. And back in the day, the telephone calls went through an operator, so it would take a few hours before we got the call. My father wanted to know his intentions. I mean, he didn't want me hurt." She continued, "Elvis said he cared very much about me and that he had plans for me. There are all these stories out there that my dad forced him to marry me. I mean, it makes me sick when I read that because that's not true." During the Q&A, 74-year-old Presley also spoke about Elvis's army service and how he feared for his entertainment career once it was completed. He was a perfect soldier, but heavy on his heart was coming back and not thinking he'd be accepted again, she revealed. Heading back to Graceland was strange for him. It was what he always wanted. He wanted to get back there. But things were changing. And it did. It did change. He went back in fear of change. Is he going to be able to keep it? Is he going to be able to afford all the things he was just getting into before the army? That's how he also feared the idea of being married. Despite all that pressure, ultimately it was his own decision, but not a certain one. So the outcome of their relationship was not surprising at all. Though Elvis felt pressured to marry Priscilla, her young moldable age was a pacifying aspect for him. But unfortunately, even this factor couldn't save their marriage. Eventually, after living increasingly apart, they separated in February 1972 and divorced on October 9, 1973. The two former spouses remained in a friendly relationship to raise their daughter, Lisa Marie, and came out hand in hand from the court after their divorce. So, does their short-lived marriage indicate that Elvis never wanted to marry Priscilla? Or was he afraid of the idea of being married? But there was another factor that destroyed their marriage as well. Watch this video and find out why Elvis couldn't make love with Priscilla.